Hi guys, this is Tony Leonard sitting in for ZBrush Live on this Saturday, December 15th, I believe it is. Anyway, we're going to just sort of freestyle today, and we're going to go through and I'm going to show you guys a few things that I've been kind of working with lately. Sort of in conjunction with using ZBrush and also some work done in Blender 2.8 EV. And I'm going to be going back and forth between the two of them, and a few other things. But figured I'd try to build something really quick. Maybe just sort of give you guys a peek as to some stuff that I've been working on, and maybe sort of break down some of how I did it and for why. So give me just a second here. I'm just going over my settings and making sure everything is cool. Give me a shout out in the chat if you could. Let me know that audio and everything are working okay. But I'm going to turn this down just a smidge. But let me know if you can hear everything okay, and if my audio is coming through. And if not, I'll try to readjust and get it going for everybody. My audio is coming through. If not, I'll try to readjust and get it going for everybody. Cool. Audio is cool. Alright. So, where to begin? Hold on just a moment. I'm going to bring up ZBrush and flip back over to you guys. Derp. There we go. Alright. Gotta leave that. There we go. Into our environment. Alright. So, as of late, I've been hooking up a lot of things using both ZBrush and Blender. Jumping headlong in as far as like a 3D package to use for a lot of poly editing, building of silhouette shapes, major forms. A lot of that stuff I've been depending on two different types of approaches, and one being, and I've probably run through this before in the last couple of months that I've done some ZBrush Lives. I've talked about using the Z Modeler tool a lot, which usually is dependent upon hitting B on the keyboard and hitting Z, as in Z, and then going to the Z Modeler tool and working on an initialized cube. So let's say, for example, I'm going to just come over to like a Polymesh 3D star, which is a great starting point usually in ZBrush, I've found, because of course, as some other folks have mentioned, it's actually a Polymesh 3D. It doesn't require you to make it a Polymesh 3D, like say, from just like a primitive cube or anything like that. And of course, you can take this and initialize it any way that you want. So I'm going to do the groundwork now to just sort of initialize a Q-cube. And that could be like just basically a 3D cube to, get started off with. It's a 2x2x2 setting, so it's basically 4 polys per side. And there's a lot of like simple things that I can do with this. So a lot of times when I pull out shapes and just start from like a sketch, sometimes I know specifically what I need, and sometimes not. So when I'm just conceptualizing, I just try to treat the 3D geometry as sort of like a blank sketch page, shall we say, alright? So I'm just going to take, cube like this, maybe mask off, and invert that mask, because basically the polys that I want to be able to stretch are going to be the unmasked areas. And I'll just get my world space widget. It's usually by default will be at the center of wherever this selection is, but I can just pull it out if I want to by holding Alt and adjusting, and slide this over to the faces here in the front. And I can tell which were the front, because if you're maybe unfamiliar with ZBrush's interface, the blue is basically the Z forward, or going forward position. Green, I believe, is the Y up, and red is the X, like positive, negative X. And there are a few things in the working order of working with symmetry that you probably should pay attention to these hairline indicators on the grid in the viewport. One being that probably, I believe it's the positive X is probably going to be on this side, the hair that's on the red. And so like a lot of times if I'm working and I do some work over here and I have symmetry turned off, if you're not, you can usually kind of go over to deformation and do a mirror, and then go back up to modify topology and mirror and weld. And usually that's for things that have like no subdivision on it, or there haven't been subdivision levels applied yet. And so usually without subdivision it should just mirror and flip over. So I'm just going to go through a couple of things, and if you guys have any questions, of course hit me up in the chat, and I'll try to keep up with the multiple chats going between Twitch, Facebook, and I think a few other places, but we'll go that way. So I'm just going to kind of jump into things. If you guys get confused or anything, you know, by all means, please do ask questions. So I'm going to stretch this out a little bit. Looking at my grid just a little bit. And then I can invert this, deselect, come back, select the other side, hold Alt, move my widget over to this side, and of course I can affect this side as well, right? Then, let's say I deselect, I'm going to grab this corner, invert it, and so to invert the mask, basically I'm just holding the control key on a PC. I suppose it would be either control, or maybe it would be the command key for Apple. Sorry, I have a problem remembering quite exactly. I haven't actually used Mac version of ZBrush in a minute. I haven't been using it as much. But I can just take this, and holding shift, I can move this poly around. So that would be basically almost just like the same way as grabbing either the verts and moving the verts, and it's sort of like an edit mode in another application, but you can sort of use it to sort of make a primitive way of moving around your verts and edges sometimes. So pretty much I'm not going to be working with the edge too much unless I make like a feature change. So I'm just going to come in here, maybe kind of decide where I want to put some landmarks or something like that, or clear the mask, select these faces, I'll hit X and work on symmetry, and I'll use Q mesh with like maybe a quarter step, and I'm just going to do like a single poly, which is whatever was selected, which those selected faces within the ZBrush modeler will turn gray, and I can just pull these out a little bit, right? So take this, maybe I'll select this and invert this. I'll look at it from the front. I'll take that widget again. I'm hitting W just to get the move tool. I can hold this up a little bit, maybe move it towards the center, and then I can use these handles here to affect things along like the up position, the up axis, which would be Y, I believe. And so I could just put the squeeze on a few things. So within this sort of just way, I can just sort of affect like just like a block out. And let's see, let's make a couple of more. So now actually I'm going to hit Q to go back into editing this into a draw mode. I can hit the space bar along the vertices, so getting everything that's going to affect everything along having to do with a vert, or I can do, you know, the actual edge. And I actually encourage people to try to play with the Z modeler, because there's a lot of different things that you can do to sort of get like yourself a concept mesh, because I use ZBrush as a tool to basically do a lot of concepting more than just hard subdivisional modeling or anything like that you might get from another package. So I'm just going to try to go over here, select an edge, click spacebar to get that menu, and I'm going to hit insert and just kind of come in and put in some edge loops. Those aren't very straight. Maybe if I do this, put it on the other side, and I'll select this guy and invert. I'll get the W key and hit it and get my move tool, move it to where I want, and move and slide this over. So this is one way I could actually do a slide, but of course there is a slide tool. So like whenever you're working with edges, if you use the Z modeler, you can just hit the spacebar, and over right under Q mesh, second down under it, or third down under it actually, is slide. And I want to do the actual edge loop complete, so I'm just going to move this edge loop around, maybe tighten it to here, and then I'm going to add more of them. So I'll do an insert here and here. I'll add 2 on both sides here, and then I'm going to go ahead and just make a little bit of changes here. I'm going to make like a little well inside of this. Oops. And I'm going to use Q mesh. I'll use 10th step. And there we go. And so it's actually going to kind of click downwards, but because I have a fairly low distance set, and that's usually the right before I selected the face, if I spacebar over it, I had single poly with a line with a 10th step, and I could do this a quarter, but if 10th is probably the smallest, and as you notice when I moved it, it actually snaps to angled positions. So if I want to create like sort of an inset area of geometry, pull it down, I can actually, you know, sort of snap to some ticks there, and it'll stop when it's absolutely straight. But if you wanted an angle or something like that, you could do something like that. So what I'm doing is I'm just creating basically sort of a block that I'll use as a silhouette, and then I'll come and do some more complicated stuff to it. So let's see here. Now I'm going to mask this. And, oops, didn't mean to do that, sorry. Just going to move this over just a bit. Make this one just as wide as the front one. Sort of eyeball it a bit. And then let's see. I'll undo this. Hit Q. Do another insert. Do this. Sorry. Let's see. Actually, I'll take this guy. Oops. There we go. Wanted to get those faces underneath. I'll pull those out a bit. So this looks kind of blocky right now, but what I can do is I can kind of go in and select other faces, pull on them in the same like half step, create an angle, and everything is still quads, which is really nice to work simplistic, you know, in this way. So there, you know, like I start to think of the shapes a little bit more. So I'm going to hit this and mask it, invert it, get the move tool out again, rearrange that over here, and pull this down. Alright. Looks like it got a little off. There we go. So, thinking of things in like a sort of end result, either I will take this and make sort of like a render where I'll do a sort of more technical illustration, but what I'm going to get at is actually kind of, you know, getting somewhere to the neighborhood of this. So this is something that I've been working over on the week, and I've been experimenting with, and a lot of times during this stream when I work with you guys in ZBrush Live, what I like to do is show you something that I've been recently building, and then sort of explain some of the techniques that I you know, derived to get to that point. And this is an Octane renderer, the standalone version. I'm just doing sort of like a lighting test of, you know, just some various complex shapes. But this entire model was done by creating a lot of the major forms in Blender with just, sort of not really subdivided geometry, but just starting from a cube and working, cubes and like cylinders up, and then composing the shape of the robot, and then, continuing on with building out just like complex body parts like the legs, the hip joint here, sort of like the thigh part here that you have. A lot of this was done in Blender using hard-ups and also box cutter, which are add-ons by a friend of mine, Master Xeon 1001, and he's worked out, even for Blender EV 2.8, he's worked out bringing the tool over and has been recently porting it over, and doing a lot of testing to see how it exactly cuts, and how to do some complex booleans. But also he has an additional tool called KitOps, which I've done a few inserts from. So to create some sort of secondary and tertiary detail, I will place those inserts on, and it sort of almost sort of acts like a mesh fusion kind of tool, where it actually affects the actual topology of the face, and brings some sort of complexity from like sort of kit bash cutters that you would have. And the entire thing is done with non-subdivided geometry. So just for example's sake, if I was to click over on the tool, or one of the parts of the tools, as you can see, I've created like a rocket launcher, sort of like a missile pod, and your geometry would come out somewhat like this. Here's some other parts that I've used that are kitbash, but this entire pod was made in Blender. And then, once I had all of the pieces connected, I bring it over to ZBrush so I can sort of do more composing, and if I wanted to, I could change this over to Dynamesh and add more feature sculpting to the surface, or I could add textures to it or what have you. So just using this as a basis for like a starting point to build a more complex model. A lot of these were very complex booleans that had been doubled and then flipped over using mirroring, utilizing a lot of Blender's modifiers and whatnot. But it comes out really clean. I saved out a triangulated mesh and brought that straight into straight in as a tool to ZBrush. Now, using, I believe, some of the techniques, like I think Paul Gabriel has probably done a stream before where he had a very cool workflow for changing very complex objects like this that are triangulated into quad surfaces. So definitely something that you might want to look up. I believe it was on one of the Ask ZBrush streams. But same thing, you could basically make a lot of your own shape language and bring it into ZBrush, and then use this as treat this as a piece that you can then further sculpt up, either by Dynameshing and then Z-remeshing. So as long as you have like a lot of different complex shapes, you can still save it out as a triangulated mesh, and then you can save it also with polygroups intact, and so everything will actually have its own polygroup. Now, some of these I may come back and actually try to hide off and make like specific polygroups for certain objects. Maybe I might want to take it into another app and just add materials for each spot. So it helps really a lot to have definitive separated geometry, or like if I have to separate a lot of different pieces, I can make sure that say all of these little hinge pieces are in one polygroup, and I can just sort of like deselect pieces off and then change their polygroup, right? So hitting something like a Control W, and it becomes the same color. And so now when I come back and unhide everything, that piece is all one polygroup. And maybe some of the stuff that's mirrored, we want to make sure that they're all the same polygroup. That way we don't run into any issues later. Like maybe I just want all of the hinges or all of the hinge pieces, because there's like a circular hinge piece in here, and then this would be static, and then maybe the lid would flap up. But interestingly enough, this project is one that I'm kind of working up some shapes to build this mech. And then a friend of mine is going to rig it, and we're going to see if we can get it to move and use it in something sort of like in a practical situation or animation. So, yeah. So I'm going to be doing some sort of complex stuff like this, digging in between ZBrush and then kicking over to Blender every once in a while and then back again, right? So let's go to it. So I'm going to take and go under here. I'm going to take this piece, get rid of the floor. Sorry, I have to pull out the tablet. Every once in a while I get used to doing things with a mouse. It's very bad working with a mouse. And let's see. Oh, that's got to clear that mask. There we go. So that's going to be actually too wide for that, so I need to pull up a little bit to get an angle. There we go. So pull this in. Actually, other way around. There we go. And then I'll do an insert here. I'll do an insert here. And we'll take an alt select these. I'll pull these in. There we go. I'll do these guys here. There we go. So a lot of these other shapes, I'm just thinking of like just really low level blockiness, right? And I do this because really what I want to do is kind of understand shapes, right? Like how they fit with other shapes or something like that. So I'm going to bust out an insert, and inside of the primitives IMMs, I like to use, if you hit M, you can get the Q cube. We'll do some more stuff with this. So I've got one box drawn on one side, and because I have symmetry turned on, it's creating another box on the other side. I will take these and keep this button handy, which is split masked points. And then therefore I can take this and lower this, and maybe we'll get some sort of creepy looking box legs. And let's see. Move this down. And I'll just sort of transform some of these shapes. Oops. B and Z. Got back to here. I'll alt click these two, pull this down. Pull these out. And I'll add an insert here. And select here. Pull these out a bit. And then we'll grab these guys here. Oop. Little autosave there. And then I'll just pull these straight down. And maybe we'll make one cut here, one here. Oops. There we go. And then I'll think to pull out these guys. And maybe here. And so you keep working in this fashion, and then, you know, gradually, like, a lot of your model will sort of start to grow its own complexity of a sort. So I'm gonna start grabbing some actual verts and moving those around. Doesn't look like much yet, but trust me, it will. Oops. There. Yeah, close enough. Didn't snap actually, but that's okay. It's quite alright. So I'm going to pull out some of these shapes a little bit. I'm going to grab this guy and invert this. I'm going to move it again. This, invert this, and move this guy in. There we go. Alright, now I'm going to take, I think, add an inserted edge loop there. Take this. There we go. Hey, what's up here? How you doing? Good to see you, dude. There we go. So I'm gonna take this. Actually, you know what? I'll take both of these. Flip that mask. Again, grab widget. Bring it over here. Pull this up. So a lot of these I'm also gonna work with, you know, like in Blender I'm going to do like a little bit of edit mode and a little bit of object editing. So it's going to be a little bit different in that environment. Alright. So now I think I want to create something of a, like a joint. And I'm intentionally leaving these kind of blocky because I think there's some other poly stuff that we could do. But basically what I'm doing is just creating a sort of like a block out. So now that I have this form, which is almost like a foreleg, I'm going to turn it a bit. Let's see if we can get it more even. 15, 20, so holding shift, I'll give it 25 degrees. And then holding alt, I'll bring this back and do the alt plus shift, which will make this snap into 5-degree increments, right? So I'll move this forward a little bit. And now that I have that, I'm gonna turn on my floor and look at this again. So actually I did this almost in the reverse. So I'm gonna turn this around so that we're facing the right way. But first I'm gonna actually mirror these along the front axis, the Z forward axis. Because this line, of course, would be Z forward. This would be towards the back. So I'm actually going to just mirror this really quick and then mirror it back. So I'll mirror it along the Z. Turning off X and Y. Mirror it. And then I can come back up to modify topology and just do a Z forward again and mirror and weld here. So now I have that back pair, right? And so that's all on the same subtool, right? So of course, you know, using masking, I can separate and just do like a split masked points from it. So if you wanted to individualize each piece of geometry, you could. So actually, let's do this. I'm gonna take this guy, and if I hold Alt and click it, I'm just gonna hold Alt and also adjust my axis so it's right. And then I want to actually rotate it, so I'm going to turn symmetry off and just rotate it around. See if we can get that turned around and moved into place. Maybe bring this in a little bit. And these guys, I'm going to shape them and actually sort of angle them a little bit more, but for now I kind of want to understand, especially when I do like hard surface things, I'm always looking to work forms and sort of understand their gesture. So not just the size and the shaping, but also kind of understanding a lot of the interworkings between different styles of like joints. You know, like with mecha design or anything like that, you really have to sort of think of things almost on a super simplistic level. So, and of course I can do other things like sort of giving the impression of a joint or a pivot point. So like say for example here on these simple parts, I'm just going to take and go back to the primitive inserts, and I'm going to hit M and just do like an insert cylinder, and I'll take and I'll drag this out and bring this in, and I'll just push the symmetry out. One of the things with working with pieces like this also, you notice how the transformation style is pretty straightforward, but it's not exactly to the more localized scale. I would hit L symmetry, and that way, you know, and plus, you know, I forgot to draw this. Oops. Forgot to draw this with symmetry turned back on, because we want equal parts on both sides. So I'm just going to draw in here. There we go. And I'm going to move this through. And this will be sort of like our kneecap or knee joint pivot. And so I just want to get it like generally lined up, because I'm going to take this, place it near its center, and get this sort of stretched out. Because eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bevel and sort of cap off this joint, which will be like a swing joint back and forth for the knee. So I'm going to hit this yellow spot here to sort of scale this down a bit. And then I can just grab it from the frame if I generally wanted to globally move it around. So I'll put that there. And I'll also, you know, let's not discredit like some of the booleans that you can do in ZBrush by itself. It just requires like a little bit of foreplanning. You know, like if you wanted to actually create a lot of pieces that, you know, from ZModeler, and then, you know, you want to later like polish up the pieces, you know, add like sort of like secondary and tertiary forms. You could work, you know, as you build up complexity, you can actually use other shapes as cutters to sort of cut in and create like a union mesh. So with ZBrush and ZBrush alone, it is very possible to do that. And I feel like it's always a good thing that I remind folks that you can do booleans or very complex boolean work inside of ZBrush. But, you know, of course, it just, relies on a little bit of planning. So let me stretch this out just a wee bit more. There we go. And then, of course, I'll split points because everything else was masked from it being an insert. And so now here's an individual piece that I can start messing with. So, you know, maybe I can single this out by using dynamic solo. And then just gonna go here, just grab the standard brush, just tapping it once so I can move this a little bit more local. But I'll hide the floor, come back to the ZModeler tool, come over here, do something like maybe a bevel. I'm just gonna use a single row because I still want to work low and do an edge loop complete. So now I can take something like this, and I can do the same thing over here, right? And then maybe take these edges here and do a crease, and I'll do an edge loop complete again. I'll just come along here, and that will ensure when we subdivide it or do any type of operation that, you know, has to do with sort of sharpening, like say for example in ZBrush I might do a mark sharp or anything like that. I want to be able to hold some of these edges. So just as a rule, if you put a crease there and I subdivide it, you see how this edge is rounded because it has no like a supporting edge loop to keep the shape of the edge of the cylinder, and it has no creasing so that it actually marks it as sharp. So what I'll do is I'll come through and I'll start putting in sort of like the creasing that holds edges, and then I can move these out, or maybe do some extrudes with the widget tool, the world space widget, and sort of push some of this geometry inwards. But kind of akin to what you would do, like let's say if you were working in Maya or someplace else, and you do an extrude and then push that extrude inward, and you're repeating your extrudes so that you could build up, you know, complexity into the shape. Here I'm just going to, you know, pretty much leave it sharp, but I want to be able to make sure that these edges hold. So I'm just going to put creases there. And because I'm working on symmetry, it happens on both sides. That way, if I turn on dynamic subdivision or something like that, what we're left with is a very clean, hard shape along its beveled edge, right? So I'm going to hit Shift D and come out of dynamic subdivision. Look at this as a polyframe again. And then also, I'm just going to maybe select from here. What is that? 2? Yep. And I'll make this a different subdivision, or excuse me, a different polygroup rather. And then I can still use a lot of my Q meshing to do a lot of extrudes that I would normally do. So back to ZModeler brush, and I can take this and just do like a polygroup inner, and same quarter step and Q mesh, and I'll bring it in, and that will actually bring some of that in. So it looks like I was actually kind of skipping a loop. So maybe, let's see, I'll just do polygroup island. Oops. There we go. And then I'll take this edge and do like another bevel. Right? And so gradually this sort of becomes more of like a pivot looking mech, like cylindrical shape. If I show it through, it starts to look a little bit more complex the more bevels I start to add in. Right? And of course I'm going to put this, let's say, mirror this a little bit. Oop. Oh yes, sorry. 2 steps I need to do. Whenever you're doing mirroring in ZBrush, I think with shapes that are like this, where you've used, you know, just like low poly editable meshes, you might want to turn off the LSIM just temporarily so you can mirror it. Otherwise, it tries to mirror it locally, and it'll just create like a messed up, like mirrored piece that it's too close to the object. So unchecking that, you notice that it mirrored exactly to the back where it was supposed to. So I'm just going to come in here now, use another cube. Maybe I'll just put it here. BI insert M Q mesh. I'm going to create a cube. Move this down here. I'm going to use this for the sort of an extension of the leg. Back on with the L symmetry. Pull this sort of here. I just want it to sort of go right into about here. And then I'm going to hit Q, and I'm going to start editing this again. Anybody have any questions or anything that you want to ask me? Yeah, mirroring is, yeah, I always forget that too. Sometimes when I'm working, the whole thing with mirroring and having LSIM on, I have to really bring myself to remember sometimes that it's on. But I'm going to turn this a little bit and sort of move direction. Do it again. See if I can sort of wrangle this shape into something kind of cool. That may work. Alright. So if you ever get, you know, also working with the between the gizmo and working with the working with shapes and using the transpose line, sometimes you like to flip plot. Just to let you know, for those that might not know, if you hit Y, you can toggle back and forth between the transpose and the world space widget tool. So right now I'm just going to use transpose to sort of straighten this out. And if if I hold shift here and then hit W, you know that it seems like it recenters it. It's actually, the axis is a little topsy-turvy, but you can always hold Alt and just flip this, you know, holding Alt plus then Shift, you can actually rotate this around. So let's say, for example, if I position this Alt and then Shift and sliding in one direction, you can sort of center it to the piece. You can hold Alt again and rotate this, so that way hitting Shift, we're snapping to the 5 degree and just doing a total 180 that's straight up. And then you could probably flip it again, actually holding Alt and going all the way around, do a 180 there. So now should be sort of more local to the front, and of course the Z forward, the X, and the Y up. You can kind of get it dialed back in so that you can start rotating stuff. So I'm just going to bring this, oops, that's actually still part of that. So let's do this. We'll mask that really quick, mask split points. Now this is its own thing, its own subtool. As, if you remember, we did sort of like a split masked objects. That's right. Back, do a slide, boy, sorry, still after a couple of months now of doing work with ZBrush since I upgraded my machine. I swear to God, like, I don't know why, but like newer gen machines and my tablet have been kind of weird. So you'll have to excuse me if I keep moving around, because it's actually me trying to grip my toggle to move the model around. So I'm going to do insert. There we go. Another insert here. And let's see. Put something here. And then I'm just going to start pulling in some faces. Doing an inward extrude, I suppose. There we go, that looks pretty clean. Yep, something like that. And so, like a lot of other corners also, especially I'm going to save this as an OBJ really quick, get this merged, and then we can work with it inside of Blender. But basically, I'm going to do some sort of like a stage 1 silhouette this way, right? I'm going to take this, of course, and do a mirror weld on Z forward. Oops, gotta remember to turn this off. There we go. And of course, if I wanted to create like longer legs, maybe like spider legs or something, I think I'm gonna actually, excuse me, alt click here, and then of course I can use my widget tool to create another set. So I'm gonna hold Control key and Shift, and then I'm gonna click on the Y up, and I'm just gonna drag down. As you notice, it created a masked copy, or the original gets masked, and then it creates a copy just along that axis that I drug out. So now I'm just gonna move these into position. I'm gonna leave them inside of the same subtool, maybe just repositioned a little bit. So I'm gonna do this. If I mask that one off too, then I can further move this about and just sort of eyeball it into place. And there we go. So those are our circular joints we're going to use. And of course I can always reshape these and sort of push them in, and then, you know, mirror and weld and get stuff back over and do stuff like that. So I did an actual similar shape to this not too long ago, but it was way more complex. But it's always good to sort of go back and start looking at things, you know, with just a simple eye, and then going from that simplicity up to something that is complex, right? So here's an interesting thing. I think I want to put in some like roll bars or something. So I think I'm going to try something here really quick. Just do something really simple to create like a sort of complex tube. I'm going to append a Z-sphere, and then I'm going to turn on transparency, go down to the Z-sphere, hit E, scale it down to the size that I think I need. And I'm not going to actually use this for topology or anything like this. What I'm basically doing is just creating a sort of starting point for some pipes, or like a sort of like more like a roll bar. But hit move on this, and then I'm going to hit X. I'm going to start drawing these out. Oops. There we go. So move these around a bit. There we go. So I'm going to move these around a bit some more, and I'm just going to think of sort of the design out of the box. You know, maybe move this about, hit Q, create another link, bending point or pivot, whatever you want to call it. Bend this up a little bit more. And let's see, let's go this way. So hit Q, W, move this up. Hit Q, bend this, do this again, just by using move. There we go. Go this way, turn directions. And I'm going to point this guy all the way down. There we go. And so we can start to get some sort of like complex tubing. If I look at this, one of the things that I'm going to do before I sort of preview how this is going to look is I'm going to come down to my adaptive skin just to do some like quick piping and stuff like that. I'm going to change the density down to 1, and especially this, the Dynamesh resolution. If I don't need Dynamesh, because it'll create sort of like, at density 1 it'll create some faceting into the object, and that is something that I don't want. Have I ever tried curve tube? Yes, of course. I just like to do it this way because I want sort of to play with a specific shape, and it's just easier for me to grab and bend some of the piping just by the Z-sphere joints. So, I mean, I guess it's kind of a way that, you know, you could figure out if you wanted to. I think in another package I would do it completely another way. I would probably use the more standard Blender way, or either Maya way of doing things, so just using a curve and then maybe extruding that. Like, you can create a curve by sort of like extruding the actual vertice. Like, you could take one object and then collapse it to a vertice, and then from that vertice you just keep extruding and then bending it, and then you could change that fill to like a pipe shape in Blender. It's really simple to do, but something along the same ideas as that is to take like this and just, you know, start, you know, sort of bashing out like a framework, and I could sort of have it kind of match the image, right? So I can take something like this and wrap it around. The same thing is sort of like on this model, if I turn this guy around. Sorry, it's a bit slow. There's a lot of render layers on this one, but the actual foregrip for this sort of armament piece here was done in exactly the same way, and then I just put certain edges in the shape to keep some of the bends pretty soft. Like if you put a bevel at the very edge loop that takes that corner, you can split it and sort of smooth it out. And then something up here, I would just put like a bevel and then maybe some supporting edge loops. And it'll keep the shape once you subdivide it. So it's always nice for stuff like that. Is that what you mean, Richard P.P. Pan? Nice name, by the way. Oh yes, before I get too headlong into today's stream, let me do say happy holidays to everyone. Happy Christmas, happy Hanukkah, happy Kwanzaa, happy holiday season to everybody. I hope you guys have a good holiday. So let's see here. I think I'm gonna move this guy just a tad. Come on now. There we go. Get this guy sort of straight up. And then, you know, if I hit A, now I have sort of like a tube shape. But here's, in fact, something that I was talking about with using Dynamesh resolution. If this is high to any, or set to anything, this shape will actually be a Dynamesh, right? Including the faceting from the low density, right? Which is something you probably don't want. So I turn the density down to 1 and then turn this to 0 in a lot of instances. And that way I'm just left with the low poly pipe. So I hit A and I hit A again, and there we go. It's just like the low part of that form. And then I can make an adaptive scan, and I can come back up and I'll just append it right over that. And then I'll hide the Z-sphere, select the skin, and of course, you know, view polyframes with something like this. BZ, you can grab this, go over to your edges, or like zoom somewhere close therein, and then you can of course hover over that, hit BZ, Z modeler. Once it's over that edge, hit spacebar, bevel. Let's do 2 rows, and I'll do an edge loop complete, and you can just start to like sort of soften these out a little bit. All right. There we go. So I'm just going to use like 2 rows, which should knock some of the hardness out of those. Like if I show you the difference, perhaps, if I hit D, and look how nice like some of those make more of a transition instead of a sharp edge, it'll actually soften it out, and then you have your pipe. You know, you just use a bevel to increase the resolution of the bend, basically, and it should come out pretty alright. Some spots may or may not meet it. You know, I suppose it depends on sort of the severity of the normal angle, but you know, I'm just gonna put them in anyway. Create some nice soft bends there. There we go. Oop. That's what I wanted. So now I have something like this, and then I can turn transparency off and keep working. But at least I have sort of a complex design frame that I can build from, right? So right now I'm just building still silhouette pieces, like thinking of major forms, the body. That's why I wanted to pull this out, sort of make like a robo-dog or like a sort of like a big dog sort of thing. And I'm just affecting the geometry ever so slightly, right? Like maybe this is a large form or a plate that I'll put on. These are the beginnings of our joints, and I'll put in something else, or like a different radial piece here for the hip, and I can start to, you know, create caps and stuff like that. Do something like this. Get another Q cube, or you know what? Actually, let's make it interesting. We'll use something else. That's a cool shape, but we need to just wrangle it down a little bit. So I'm gonna pull this. Oops. Do that. Pull this in. Polyframe looks good. Alright. And plus, of course, in edit mode, if I'm working in polys or something like that, I can grab this inner edge loop or edge ring and do some nice extrudes from that, creating more secondary or tertiary form, and just build it up. So I'm going to go ahead and split this and sort of place it here. Because we have a complete edge loop and everything is connecting around the outside, of course, I can come around and oops, sorry, BC. Take this edge and do a bevel, and I'll just do one single row and edge loop complete. And let's look at this dynamic solo, and I'll do the other side. So just, I mean, really, a lot of these are just simple tricks in the book. You know, like with just basic poly modeling, but yeah, this will be like a hip plate, and then maybe I'll do a cutaway here, and we can have a different shape. But at least the basics of that shape are there, and everything is still nice and in low poly, right? So it should be fairly easy to work with, you know, should you go somewhere else outside of ZBrush or anything like that. There we go. Raise this up. So that's going to be the joint to the side, and it's going to be mounted to here. And I could actually do like some other like joint stuff here. And then we can sort of start to get very complex leg shape. You know, if I start using hydraulics and other like jointed pieces that I can add onto here. Also in-gone shapes to maybe do some complex cutting. So I'm just going to go ahead and mirror this. Actually, because this is sitting to the rear of the thing, it's actually the other side of the Z forward. It's actually the Z to the rear. So I'm going to just take this and, of course, go to deformation, mirror it along the Z, and then go back and mirror and weld on the Z going backwards again. But this time without LSIM. And there you go. Alright? So and let's see. pull this guy up, and we're gonna squish it down a bit, stretch it out, and we're gonna have a shape that's somewhere sitting forward like so, maybe a little bit more aggressive than this. I don't know, how aggressive does a robo-dog need to be? A mule, as it were. Take this, flip that. We haven't even really gotten to the good stuff. The good stuff is just on the other side of the horizon here. Alright. So one of the cool things about QMesh as well, I think I might try it because I want to create something of like a frame for the head and then put some interesting things sort of in and around the frame, sort of creating a hollowed out false dog head, or like maybe where it keeps its sensors or something like that. I'm just gonna push shapes through on this shape right here. So, and rather than just like using another cutter to cut through it, I don't need to do that necessarily because I can use QMesh. So I'm gonna come in and again hit BZ, get the Z modeler. We're in symmetry, of course. So I'm gonna put a edge there, or actually a bevel there is what that is. And that's okay because I just wanted to split up some faces. Insert. I'm gonna create sort of like a box on the inside of this. Oops. There we go. And actually make this a little bit more. Oops. Oops. Come on. There we go. Build some sort of like complex divot in here. And so now I can just sit back and select some faces. Like, I'm going to select this one, this one, this one, and this one. Here, here, and here. The same way. And this time I'm just going to QMesh it. I have single poly. And I'm going to go full step. And if I pull down on this, it's going to start to extrude inward. But if I keep going to the other side, I can create a hole. And just have these welded. Right? And so next, when I do some more complex booleans, like especially with using hard ops and box cutter, what I'm going to start to do is start cutting away at this large shape. So I'm just trying to get like the silhouette of things kind of, you know, really without having to, you know, like a way that you don't have to be a serious poly modeler, but, you know, you can use some poly editing tools within ZBrush. You know, if sculpting is more, like even sculpting organic is more your thing, you can always come back and do some things with Z modeler and just like simple primitive shapes. And you know, it's like kind of like the blurred eye, right? You're thinking in abstraction first and then honing that abstraction into a purposed design, right? So that, I mean, while some of this might even to some look kind of silly, like, you know, what is he doing? He's just moving around a bunch of boxes. But the overall objective of this is to create a sketch of things like sort of a unison or a song of different shapes that you can then edit and bring complexity to and have more of a complex figure, right? So a lot of these, like, you know, I might start moving some of this the geo around. I'll merge some things and, you know, just keep polygroups and then start, you know, using masking to edit things around. Like between this joint and this joint, I noticed that the front legs are a little bit too close, but I'll just fix that really quick and then we'll jump over to something like Blender. So I'm going to create another pipe after this and sort of go around the design, but maybe that and some feet, and I think we would probably be ready with most of our first round of shapes, right? So just, I mean, you could just take like a few minutes and do a sketch like this. You know, you have the beginnings of you know, a 3D piece where you can start to build from, right? Because I mean, like the mech that I showed you guys here in Octane, I also have this as well, you know, right here in ZBrush. And here, just as an example, I'll click on this so I can remember which shape I'm working with. But if I go up here, I have some shapes like this, in which I'm using, you'll have to excuse me, I have somebody delivering something. But you have some shapes in which, you know, you can make, you know, really complex objects. Excuse me for just a moment. Sorry about that, folks. Had a little FedEx going on. Busy time during the holidays. Where was I? But yeah, this is something where, you know, a lot of these shapes, just for example's sake, the basic shapes for the legs were done in Blender, just with poly editing a box, right? Just like a default box. And then there are a few other pieces from my own kit bash, and maybe a few others that I used in here to build up shapes. But something like these gun pods especially, you know, where we have like a lot of complexity built in. We have like the mixels, you know, sitting on the inside, or like difficult hinge pieces. A lot of these are duplicated from working one shape and then putting the shapes together and then repeating a lot of those shapes and marrying them over until I have like something that's a little bit more coherent. A lot of the cut lines are actually cut booleans that go through. Some of them have thickness and some don't. But I pair those with the visual language of kits that I'm used to using. And so the sort of like a synergy starts to build up, or a harmony between different parts. Like this mech hand is one that I sell on Gumroad, and I have it in different poses. So when I comp out like a mech of some sort, I already have a pre-built hand to use as sort of like a basis or a starting point. You know? So let's continue on. Even have feet pads under there. So, I mean, and if you were to look at some of the geometry of some of these things, like some of these parts are decimated, so I may have to, you know, ZBrush them and then project back the details onto the shapes, or at least clean them up or retopologize. Some things need to be turned on and off that may necessarily not be needed. But yeah, when I'm working from Blender, I bring it back to ZBrush, a lot of the shapes are triangulated, but I do retain the polygroups. And so when you just save or export out from Blender, make sure, you know, you have triangulate and probably polygroups turned on, and it should come back in a manner that, you know, into ZBrush in a manner that it's not only pretty clean looking, but, you know, you can still grab the parts and separate them out if you need be. You could, you know, dynamesh a lot of these and start sculpting and cleaning up the forms. So as a conceptual way of working, that's really cool. And you guys have seen me, of course, in previous streams where I take, you know, complex stuff like this and I put materials on it in Keyshot, and just basically, you know, use toon shading to turn it into a sort of like a complex art piece, like a, you know, like if I need to present sketches or, you know, very complex designs to an art director or something like that, and they need to see it in its more simple form, or up to, you know, rendering it out and actually getting it ready in something like Octane, or, you know, wherever you're going, Redshift, what have you, or building and baking some of this stuff out. You know, you can probably slap UVs on a lot of this geo, even if it's triangulated. I'm sure you could probably make material IDs. And then, you know, just for conceptual sake, you could bring it into like either Quixel or Substance and start building up your own textures and applying them sort of in a procedural fashion. A lot of times, sometimes, you know, what I'll do is I'll take shapes like this into Octane, and then further, you know, just drop like a normal map of a texture, and then it procedurally box models it around, or box maps it around the object, you know, and I can affect the change or the bump of that. To make it look more like an actual physical material. Anyway, let's get back to it. So I'm going to come back to my dog, and let's see. Actually, you know, let's do this. I want something of a toe. So, flipped on me, so I'm just going to rotate this. Get it straight. Turn local back on. Squeeze this in. Push this forward. There we go. Oops. I wanted to grab the blue box. I'm going to make this thin because I want part of this to recede into this inset area here. Then I'm going to pull this down. Is with my tablet, it always seems to offset things. There we go. All right. And let's see, undo that. Do another insert up here, one here, one here, one here, and then I'll take a bunch of faces from the inside of this, and actually I'll minus that one. And with this I'll just take the Q mesh and push it through. So yeah, that'll be an interesting form of which I can sort of take and start to chop up pieces from, and it could be really cool. So take this. Push this inward. Take these and sort of pull them in a little bit. There we go. Bring this down. Oops. There we go. Bring this down. F. Oops. Let's see. Sorry about that. Actually forgot to separate this. So that's just going to be my sort of shoe for the dog. Maybe scale this a little bit. Bring it up. And forward a tad bit. There we go. And these guys, I'll go ahead and flip them over. So because they're already in front, I can just go ahead and mirror and weld them along the Z. Needing to take this off, or the LSIM off, and again hit it. And there are the feet. Let's see. Pull this silhouette out a little bit more on the tail end. Even if I deselect and I pull out some other parts, I can always have them snap to the same. So I'm just gonna Q-mesh this out, bring it up. Let's see here. Mask these off. Invert. Actually, hold on a second. Just these guys. There we go. Select this, pull it out. Oops. There we go. Hit W, Alt, and pull this back up. That'll be cool. Yeah. Could do some interesting things with that a little bit later. Okay, so now that I have all of this, what I'm going to do is just probably try to take it and merge it, or somehow I need to get it over to Blender, right? Better the thing is that I probably merge it and then bring it over to Blender that way as a merged, you know, like OBJ, because then I could still select and ungroup some of the parts and start using some tools with it. One of the things that I'm thinking of just before I go over there is taking this and actually turning it back, because it may work better if it is flattened out a little bit. Just would have to rotate it anyway. So I'm going to create some actual extra parts by modeling these in between what would be sort of a neck shape. So I'll just push this forward. As well, I'm going to come over and select these, and I'm going to move just the front part again. And I'll hold Alt, straighten out this, move it forward just a bit. Right about there. Want to do the front. Just want to move these up. And then again over here. So right now I'm just kind of eyeballing the position of the legs. I'm not really totally worried about where they go or how far off, if they need to be exactly the same front and back. Because pretty much when I design something, when I get to more of a complex stage, I just move them, sort of pose them around anyway. Okay, so I can take this, and what I'm going to do is just merge, click to merge UV, and then probably merge visible. So everything that's turned on within this file, it's actually going to, let me unmask everything. There we go. So there's our shape. Merge visible, and then from that merge visible copy, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and rename it. There we go. Always with proper naming. And let's see. So I'm not going to worry about hip just yet, but I'm going to come back up and I'm just going to hit export on this. And the export is just going to be an OBJ, and I'll go and I'll save it. I'll skip over to Blender, and then I'm going to go File, and of course, you know, just to let you know, guys know, there's a little bit of difference between a lot of the stuff that's going on between Blender 2.7.9 and 2.8. 2.8 has a few newer features that I think that you guys are really going to get excited about, including the EV render, where you can do, you know, a lot of ambient occlusion, volumetrics, real-time shading, and stuff like that. So, without much ado, go ahead. Flip to mouse here for a minute and click away. So I'm going to delete the default cube, come up, File, and I'm just going to import that same OBJ. Wait for an OBJ. Here, Robodog Live. There we go. Whoa. So one of the things that I can first see is scale is probably an issue. So I might have to mess with the scale a little bit, but it looks really small. So while I have everything, I'm just gonna actually pull it up a little bit. Looks way too small. There we go. Maybe make it a little bit bigger. This is probably super huge by comparison, but I'm just going to scale it up and start working on it. So now pretty much what I can do is I could take each piece and start to work on it, each little sectional piece in detail. One of the things that I need to do here really quick, I need to go back to ZBrush. I actually forgot when I exported it. I need to look at the export settings. And probably turn off merge UV chords, and I think texture I don't need, and maybe even group. The texture has to do with the shader, which really there isn't a material on it, but sometimes when exporting subgroups, everything comes in a little bit broken. So one of the first clicks that I made, I noticed, yep, this isn't right, because it'll actually part out the actual faces of the mesh, which is kind of weird, but it will come out like that, and that's not what we want. We want everything like properly welded, I believe. So I'm gonna go back and just turn this off really quick, export as a quad, and redo that save. So exporting again, same name and everything, replace, come back over to Blender, hit all with select all with A. And of course, Blender 2.8 now has like a left click, which is the happiness of many. So I'm going to actually delete this and re-import it. So now most of these shapes are grouped together, but I think I can take it and just unparent it. So I'm gonna try to do that. Let's see. Empty groups, automatic weights. Clear and keep. Transform, I suppose. Well, I wonder if I need it. Excuse me for one sec. Just gotta save this out the right way. It's either one of these. I think it's to turn this off. Either that or merge the UVs. Some of that stuff has to be turned off. So I'm going to save over it one more time and see if this works. There we go. So I'll bring this guy up a little bit. Yeah, it's still saving. For some reason it keeps splitting it up, but not exactly what I wanted. For some reason I can't break it apart, but I need to actually bring this in without anything paired. Place. Not the subgroups, but I will do this. And I will save it again. It's always a hit and miss thing that I have to remember to try to do. Alright. There we go. Get this imported now again. See if this, hope that this worked right. Okay, it worked sort of right. So now I just need to figure out how I'm gonna actually just take this apart. So as you can see, all of the geo actually stayed intact, so that's good for that. So at this level I can still sort of edit things or do like a lot of different like poly editing that I would do anyplace else. You know, with Blender of course you can hit 1, 2, and 3, 1 being the verts, 2 being the edges. If I deselected it, would look like this, and this is basically currently like an edit mode, because things are a little bit more modular, I believe, in Blender, and so there's an object mode and an edit mode, and between the two you can either edit the entire object or you can actually just hit like the poly faces and stuff and start pushing and pulling like you would any place else. You know, you can select some faces, you know, you can pull those out, you know, and then I could use mirroring to mirror things on one side to another, because there's a lot of modifiers that you can use. So let me just see if I can separate this out so we can use it a little bit better. one of the first things that I wanted to use once I get this apart is use box cutter and show you guys. I think I've touched upon it, of course, in other streams. But time willing, I'll try to chop some stuff up and show you guys kind of what it's all about. Need to actually show this. The actual whole object. Need to get it ungrouped, I believe. What does it say in the collection? Ah, okay, so my collection of shapes is actually one entire mesh grouped in, and I need to actually figure out how I'm going to take each group and actually just separate it. I could have brought the entire thing in one by one, or I could have probably saved it in a different way, like FBX or anything else like that, but quite simply I think it would have been still joined the same way. Bear with me, I'm just trying to pull it apart, because everything seems to be, when it brings it over, it actually, all of the stuff is joined, not really joined, but as much as it is like sort of grouped together. So I need to maybe unparent it. So that everything is not grouped. Let's see, sorry. I'm gonna clear parent and then maybe do again. Not sure. For some reason I can't seem to pull some of these apart. But I will figure it out for next time. Because I'm still actually a little bit new to Blender, especially just 2.8. Until now, a lot of times I build things separately. So I'm having a little bit of trouble trying to figure out how I can pull some of these shapes apart. I will, of course, investigate that and get back to you guys for next time. But basically what I wanted to do in Blender is kind of just show, just as an example sake, where I take a lot of this stuff. So I'm going to hit on the keyboard Alt-W, which activates the box cutter element of things. And as you can see here at the top, you know, like I can either work in a destructive or non-destructive manner. And so with non-destructive, I'll just show you sort of like just some really basic stuff. I'll use a box and just basically I just have to go over the highlighted mesh, and when it's selected, draw out boxes and basically start making cuts. Now the cut that I made is actually destructive even though we're in non-destructive mode. If I actually unhide all of the objects, this is what's happening, is that there's a shape that I've just drawn out and it's gone along the normal of the object and it's drawn a box, and then with that box it'll actually add a modifier to itself so that it, I can go and just cut it, right? So this actual Boolean modifier is what's happening to the surface of this, right? So with that in mind, like I can still edit this box as long as it's live. And so since it is, if I like say take a G and Y and move it along the surface, I can actually cut through something or cut into something, and then once I run all of the modifiers or apply them gradually, I can then take those shapes and move them around and sort of compose shapes into complexity. So something like that. And then I can just Alt-H to view it, all of the live objects. There's also a Boolean scroll, so in other words you can scroll through the objects that you're using as cutters. using some of the smart linked stuff with hard ops. So right now I'm just gonna not really worried about some of the hard ops features as much as I am with the box cutter, but I'll just come over and just start to make some like sort of artful cuts into some of the geo, right? So that's one. I'll hit H and hide it. I'll select the mesh again. And actually this time I'm going to right click to pause the shape. And then if I look in here very closely, what I'm going to do is actually take and do a bevel inside of this. So I can actually hit B on the keyboard and make a sort of beveled cut into this. And I'm only affecting this on one side, but as you can see this live green box here, if I hold shift and then click from that red box, basically it keeps the shape live. So I can come back anytime I want and actually just edit this shape. So like let's say if I tab into edit mode, and I deselect from the shape and I hit Control R and I make like a little bit of a profile here on the inside of this, and I hit like say the faces. Let me see if I can grab the bottom. There we go. And then back to solid. Okay, now if I hit E to extrude and then S, I could extrude outward, and then I could sort of mess with the actual profile of the objects that I'm trying to mess with. And so, you know, you can extrude along normal or something like that. I just wanted to pull it out and show, but you can deselect it. If you go back, see how it's kind of cutting in those edges. Probably a little bit too thick and a little bit too small for such a tight area as this, but you can sort of create steps and stuff. The problem solving here that's happening with this shading is probably the size and the way it's trying to solve cleaning up some faces and or what it's doing with some ingons. You might get some shading issues, so like be prepared to kind of come in and actually have to manage or close up certain faces, or there is a component called a blue box that you can use to sort of cut between shapes like this and create like sort of a bisect in the object, and then those bisects a lot of times will clean up a lot of the shading issues, because basically versus a lot of other applications don't know how to look at an actual how should I say this? It doesn't know how to look at an ingon and shade it properly because it has more than four sided faces. But Blender knows how to deal with a lot of the ingons a little bit more successfully, you know. But sometimes you still need to cut them or create an edge through them to sort of support the system that allows its shading to happen. It's very hard to explain why the sort of do's and don'ts between the two, but yes, you can actually fix stuff like this. So, but I'm just going to make a simple shape, and if I go back before I make a cut, you know, without any type of profiling or anything like that on the shape, and I look at it, I can actually stack a lot of these modifiers up on each other, right? Or if I go all the way back, I can use beveling here, and then I'm going to actually make another shape. I'm going to leave this unhidden so you can just see the shape, but if I select this shape again and I hit Control and start cutting and I push this inward, I'm going to hold the shape, I'm going to hit B just like last time and create the same profile, right? Right clicking again, and then I'm going to hold and actually just tap the Q key, which creates another bevel the opposite direction. If I hit B again, I can actually change the width of that bevel on the inside. So just giving sort of like a soft edging on the inside of this, and I'll hold shift and click, and I'll hit A twice to deselect it. And so now you can see sort of like the edge of what's going on now. I'll take this shape, and I'll actually hide them by hitting H. And so now I have two cut grooves. And so you can imagine, you know, as I would just sit here, I would just keep kind of coming in here and start doing some cuts. I'm only kind of working on one side of things, but here's the trick of it. If I select this, it would probably be better if these were applied, but even still, if not, I can still move those over to symmetry. So, because they're still live, right? But what I'll need to do is I'll hit Alt, and I don't need to change the scale or apply scale just yet, but I can skip it over to the other side. In fact, here, let's do this. I'm going to hit Alt H, come in here, click here, and then I'll actually apply location, rotation, and scale, and then Alt X, and I'll bring those shapes over to the other side, which should generally have the same modifier applied. So that's how I get it on the other side. If the modifier is actually applied and it's actually cut out of the geometry already, I could just simply do a mirror and weld bisect, and it should come out. So what I'll do is I'll just take this one, do the same thing, location, scale and rotation, and then I'll hit Alt X, which will bring up sort of this widget here. And so what I'm doing is I'm actually selecting the side that I want to be copied to the opposite side. So I'll do that, and then I can just take these sort of ghosted frames and hit H to hide, and there's my detail on the inside of that. And I could just keep rinse and repeating this step until I sort of get some shapes into complexity, right? So if I hit, like, let's say, oh, for some reason my keyboard isn't working. Come on. There we go. 3, 9. I'll come over. I'll just make like a general shape down here. And actually this time around, I'm not going to use a box. I'm actually going to use a yellow box. The yellow box is basically a slice tool. And I'm going to right click it to hold it. And I'm going to hit the space bar to sort of adjust and move it. Right? And because there's no extrusion yet, so but this is actually drawing at the normal, so what I'm going to hit is E and expand this out to the other side. And this is kind of weird because I drew the box and it's actually on its normal, but it's not straight. So I actually need to fix this because it's sitting at an angle. So I'm going to actually hit escape, go 1, 3, 9, look at it from this side, drag out a box, hit X, hold this shape, and then I'll hit B and just sort of round off the corners because I want the rounded corner right in the middle there. And then I'll hold Shift and draw this shape out. Now the shape looks a little bit big, but of course, you know, you could apply location, rotation, and scale again, hit S, X, scale this in, make that a little bit smaller so it's a little bit more manageable. And now of course I can move this as a cut line anywhere I want, right? So I'll take G and Y and I'll move around this. Excuse me for a second. Sorry about that. My apologies. Okay, so let's just hurry through this because I know we probably got to end here in about 15 minutes. But once I have all of these boxes in, I can sort of build up some complexity and keep achieving sort of like that secondary and tertiary forms as I spoke of. And it's not just cutting either. I'm actually going to take this, and it looks pretty sharp because I haven't really beveled the shape. You know, it's like it's pretty flat and dull as a shape goes, like a lot of the edges and whatnot. So I'm going to actually select this shape and just hit, for example's sake, Q, and I'm going to C-sharpen this shape. And it throws it a little bit off, but what it's basically trying to do is actually put a bevel on all of the edges. And so I just want like a nice soft edge so that it doesn't look like the actual material was, you know, I've spoken about this before, where if a flat piece of geometry, it has no beveling on the edges, and so that they're not soft shapes, they're actually just hardened like edge shapes. So a couple of things that it might be, you know, using C# and with hard ups that you can do is you can actually put it in an angle, hit Q, B, and add a B width, and then I can just, on the micro level, just give it like that nice little softness, almost like as if I was to smooth the mesh somehow, or, you know, when you do like a clay polish inside of ZBrush, it's a very similar thing. And it'll hold on, the same modifier can be used on a lot of the other pieces that you're creating. So if you had a cut that was already pre-established, it's not going to carry over. But the same thing with this one, I can hit Q, C sharpen, Q, B, and bevel that again. And maybe a little bit tighter this time around. And there's only 3 expanses in the bevel, but I can just use the scroll wheel to bring it up. So like 6 or 8, and we can get a nice super sharp bevel there. And then I can also cut in between some of these, because it actually, because of the modifier, it treats it as like a separate piece of geo. But when you look at the wire, if I tab in, it's actually cut. Right? So pretty cool stuff for that. Destructive, it would just make a destructive cut through it. But with live, of course, you can go back and re-edit it, just showing all and then looking at the wireframe mesh. So same with this here. If I click here and I hit tab, it's actually literally cut it into a piece. So that's another piece that I can then later edit. Like if I wanted to come in and like pull it out, do extra extrudes or whatnot to it, I can work with the pieces individually. Right? So just something really cool to show you guys, like feature wise. And then I can save this back and bring it to the other. So I would probably generally take a little time to go through some of these pieces, but I'm just gonna go through and just make a few little decisive cuts, and I'm gonna try to keep some of the detail going. Right? So I'm gonna come in and put that. Also, that bevel needs to be at an angle, so that way next time I come back and start chopping again, it will maintain the same bevel. So I'm just going to push this in a little bit, and I'm going to try to keep focused on just one side, and then we'll mirror it in the end. It's funny enough, when you start working with this stuff, like you could make multiple cuts, and you could have probably like 70 modifiers stacked up on each other, and then in the end, what you'll have to do is just convert that. Convert the whole mesh so that it applies all the modifiers, and I'll show you. So there's a new feature with the box cutter. It's called laser cut. It's really cool. You can kind of make a generalized cut through the entire mesh. So like I could take something like this and just let it go, but I have to select it. Sorry. Oops. There we go. Oh. No, go back. Sorry, sort of made a miscut there. There we go. So I'll cut there. Look at it from above. Straight down this way. Not sure why, but it seems like my computer is slowing down just for a second. I wonder if I'm doing something in the background that I don't know about. Quite possibly. But we'll just keep going. Oops, that's an error. So there we go. Sorry, actually didn't have the right piece selected. we'll grab this piece here, and maybe we'll do a circle. I'll just take this, size it up, extrude it inwards, and for this I might want to do something with it, so I'm going to hit shift and click it to apply it, and then hit S to scale it back down, because the closer I get to those edges, you see that it was sort of starting to break the mesh a little bit. So I have to be careful for certain spots like that. Maybe the bevel might be too wide and it'll make some of the shading on the faces look a little janky. So I'm just gonna try to be careful of that, but I'll come back and I'll fix the beveling later. Some of them might just need a small bisect in between them, and that's where I start to use the blue box in this, but let me just show you how you can quickly make a few cuts and then come back to ZBrush. So I'm going to go ahead and just apply some scale to this little insert, and then make sure that I Alt X, copy that over to the other side. So now I have two little round holes on both sides, and I'll come over and just hide it. And then also, of course, you know, because a lot of the stuff that I'm dealing with here in Blender is real time, go ahead and hide this. I'll go over to my shading and I'll just grab a matte cap and put that on there. Maybe we could sort of like have a better view of some of our shapes, because it's got shading on it. Shadows and AO can be applied. So if you hit the Alt V key, a lot of times you can hit AO and soft shadows, and of course we can see with a little bit more clarity a different material without really, you know, bogging the system down with something like a rendered view. Of course, you know, if you hit the Z key, you know, you can go from solid to rendered to sort of like a look dev mode, or see the wire. Each one has its sort of different shading. I think with look dev you can use HDRIs and you can import them, but you have some stock customs that you can have on the inside of this already to sort of change the look of stuff. Right? So I'm just going to go with solid just for this and start working shapes here. So next time around when I have you guys in stream, I think I'll probably build this up to a little bit more complexity, but sort of that's the gist of doing things. And of course, you know, if I sketch out something like this, I want to try to continue it into the next stream so that, you know, we can sort of have a progression of shapes. And so I'll take it through another round. It looks like I'm running out of time a little bit, and I gotta duck out just ever so slightly early, but just for example sake, let's take this and I'll bring it back into ZBrush. So I'm going to select everything, and then I'm going to actually deselect this. There we go. So no camera and no light with that, and just the actual mesh itself. Hey buddy. Sorry about that. My little boy just kind of burst into here. His mom is going to grab him and take him out. But okay, so we'll take this and then we'll try to like flip back over. So I'll just export this, but before I need to do that, a lot of those live shapes, they have modifiers just like this. So what I'm going to do is right click this and convert to, and go mesh from curve, meta, surf, text, and that should make most of this whole and apply it with some of these modifiers. But if they don't, you might have to individually like come in and select certain meshes and just go ahead and apply them all. One little tip, if you guys click here and hold the mouse on the left, you can just go all the way down and open up all of these modifiers. So I'll just apply them really quick. For some reason when I did a convert, it didn't apply. So I'll just go down, keep applying. That's done. Any other shapes? I don't think so. Nope, that's all good. Okay, so then now we can take this and export it and see how it looks. Oh yes, just in case we had anything that didn't show up on one side, I think everything is pretty much mirrored. just for that little bit of detail. But just to sort of give you guys an idea of how these cuts are made. Let's go ahead and look at it. So I'm going to export it, wavefront, and I'll give it a name. Test RoboDog. Okay, and then I want to make sure that I have selection only checked. Apply modifiers will usually work, but sometimes it doesn't apply all of them. You just need to make sure. Smoothing groups if you have them, poly groups, and of course if I keep scrolling, where is it? There it is, triangulate faces. So I'll save this out. I'll export it. Yeah, next time I need to figure out how to properly save between the two. I think there's something with that export setting that I think it either will make so that you can export the whole thing that's been merged, but still be able to grab groups, but not split it by the actual polyfaces. Like sometimes it'll unweld things, and what you'll get is a collection of all of your shapes that are unwelded. Like you can just grab the face and start moving around. You don't want to do that. So anyway, I'm gonna come back here. I'm just gonna append a polymesh 3D star, and on this guy I'll hide the other, and I'll just re-import the dog right over the star. Right, so I'll come back over here and I'll import, what do we got? Test RoboDog. Boom, and there we are. Everything's back, plus the details that we had cut in are now there. Right. Oops. And they look pretty clean. Some of the beveling worked out pretty nice. If you look very closely, you can see the beveling and how it comes out. And depending on some of this, how you clean it up, it might show you some nice geo, but if it doesn't have the supporting edge loops, it's probably not going to work out too good with stuff that's triangulated. Because what happens is it breaks some areas down, and you get like faces that are kind of overlapping. So if the bevel was turned up a little bit cleaner, maybe more than 3 or something like that, you could probably start to see it. But working the shapes, you know, the fidelity of which you can make, you know, nice cut shapes and sort of repeat those shapes and keep them sort of like a hard surface mechanical look without looking too crazy. It actually comes out pretty nice. So, alright guys, so next time around we're going to continue this sketch, and I may actually record some things. I keep trying to record things for this session so that I can come back and show you guys kind of the in-between spots of what I did, because sometimes you can't fit everything into 2 hours. So if I can get that and post it, I'll definitely try to find a way that you guys can access it. But until then, stay tuned for next time, and I'll just keep building it up until it becomes sort of a finished deal. Next time around, probably I'll jump over to Octane and sort of show you how I set up some of these like little short renders, and/or how to put materials to them. Alrighty, guys, thanks again for joining me. We're heading up to 6 o'clock at the top hour. Thank you very much for watching. Of course, if you have any comments or any questions, sometimes I know I'm sort of bad about paying attention to both screens and keep going in real time at the same time. But let me know. Those could be teeth. Yes, they could be teeth for the dog. Or I would cut a space and actually put an object so that they would be like maybe something like Trapjaw, where it has like squared off teeth inside of the sort of false RoboDog mouth, something like that. But select apply modifiers when exporting. Yeah, you could definitely apply modifiers when exporting. Sometimes I have found, though, every once in a while it doesn't grab all of the modifiers applied to every shape. So just as a me being worried about it, sometimes I'll just go down the list, but a lot of times when you convert it, it'll grab, maybe I didn't have everything selected correctly, but it will generally compact all of the modifiers and leave you with the mesh that's left over, which is great. But if you want to still keep it live so that you can go back and change, I would probably duplicate the file and then do that, or apply all of the modifiers and then save it out. Sound good? All right. Thank you, everyone. Have yourself a blessed holiday season. Again, Merry Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, Namaste. Cheers. You guys be good. Peace.